There is a moment in the great hall of the Iron Reach that I still cannot decide whether to call the worst of my life or the making of it. And it begins with a woman in white closing her gloved hand over the one thing in the world that was mine. The whole selection stood assembled. 40 high-born daughters in their dyed silks, the lords of every great house, the king upon his throne. And at the centre of all of it was me, a cast-out Omega who was not supposed to be there, who was not even supposed to be in the city, with my mother's bone token clutched in a fist that would not open. The most beautiful candidate in the realm stood very close and spoke so softly only I could hear her. "No one will believe a stray," she said. "Give it to me, and disappear, and I will let you keep your life." Her glove closed over my hand and the token inside it. And across that vast cold hall, the Alpha King who had let me sleep on his steps rose from his throne with something terrible breaking across his face. He had called it mercy, what he did that dawn. The whole court called it mercy. I was about to learn it had never once been mercy. But you cannot understand the woman in white, or the token, or the king on his feet, until you understand how an Omega with nowhere left on earth to go came to be asleep on the palace steps the night before the realm chose its queen. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't even supposed to be in the city. But there I was, asleep on his steps. My name was Eloan, though for most of my life I had answered to nothing so dignified as a name. I was an Omega of the pack of Vanthold, which is a polite way of saying I was the lowest thing a powerful house kept. The rank you are assigned when someone has decided your blood is worth nothing and wants the matter settled. I scrubbed and carried and slept in the cold and was spoken over rather than to. And I had learned, the way the low learn, to take up no space and ask for nothing, and forget, this is the important part, to forget that I had ever been anything else. Because I had been something else, once, though I had spent 15 years training myself not to remember it. I was perhaps 6 when the pack of Ashfell fell. The realm was told it was a plague, a wasting sickness that took a whole pack in a single hard winter. Tragic, no one's fault, the kind of thing the gods do. I was told the same, eventually, until I half believed it. What I actually remembered, in the places memory hides when it is too dangerous to hold, was not sickness, it was fire, and men who were not sick at all, and my mother pressing a small carved disc of bone into my hand and folding my fingers shut over it and telling me to run, and to never ever show it to anyone, because it bore the mark of Ashfell, and the mark of Ashfell was now a death sentence. The pack of Vanthold took me in afterward, a stray child of a dead pack, and made me an Omega, and I did not understand until much later that this was not charity. It was burial. You do not kill a child of 6 in front of witnesses. You strip her rank, you bury her name under the lowest one you have, and you let the realm's tidy story of a plague do the rest. And in 15 years, no one ever once looks at the Omega scrubbing the floor and sees the last living daughter of the pack you slaughtered to build your house upon. I kept the token. Through 15 years and 100 cold nights I kept my mother's bone disc hidden against my skin, the one thing that was mine, the one proof that I had been loved by someone before I was made into nothing, and I never showed it to a soul, exactly as she said. The night before the selection, the Lord of Vanthold cast me out. I never learnt the full why of it from him directly, but I have pieced it together, and it is this. His daughter, the Lady Ingrid, was the front-runner to be chosen Luna of the Iron Reach, and a house about to set its daughter beside the king does not leave loose threads lying about, and I was the loosest thread of all, the one servant in Vanthold old enough to half remember Ashfell. The one creature who might, if she ever found her voice, say the wrong word at the wrong moment about how the great house of Vantold truly came to be great. So they cast me out, not killed. Even then, 15 years of habit makes even murder lazy. But turned out the gate with nothing, the night before the selection, to die quietly somewhere on the roads where casting out usually finishes what it starts. I did not go to the roads. I went, without quite deciding to the one place a memory I had buried for 15 years dragged me. Because my mother, in the folding of my fingers over the token, had told me one other thing, the oldest law of the Reach, the one the great houses had let everyone forget, that the steps of the king's own palace are sanctuary, that any wolf, of any rank or none, who reaches them and lays herself down, has claimed the protection of the throne itself, and cannot lawfully be touched. I did not believe it would work. I am not sure I even believed it was real. But it was 3 weeks' walk to no one, and 3 hours' walk to the palace, and a body that has decided to live will carry you toward the only hope it can find. And so I walked into the capital I was never supposed to enter, and I climbed the long pale steps of the Iron Throne in the dark, and I lay down on the cold stone at the top of them, and I put my mother's token in my fist, and I slept the way the truly finished sleep, which is to say like the dead. I was not supposed to be there. I was the last person in the realm who was supposed to be on those steps. And that, it turned out, was the whole of it. The Alpha King found me at dawn. I did not wake. That is the thing the whole court could never get past, in the days after, that the most feared wolf in the territories came out at first light, as was his solitary habit, and found a filthy cast-out Omega asleep across the threshold of his own palace on the morning of the selection, and did not wake her, did not call the guards, did not have the offence removed. He sat down on the step beside her, and he stayed. I know this only because he told me later, and because 40 furious witnesses confirmed it. He sat on the cold step beside a sleeping stranger as the sky greyed and the palace woke around him, and when his steward came to murmur that the candidates were arriving, and the king could not possibly be found sitting on the ground beside a vagrant Omega on this of all mornings, the king said, quietly, in the voice that ended arguments, that the woman was under sanctuary, that she was not to be touched, and that he would thank everyone to lower their voices, because she was tired, and she had clearly come a very long way. I woke at last, to full daylight, and the sound of horns, and to the discovery that the most powerful man in the realm was sitting on his own steps an arm's length from me, watching me with an expression I had no framework for, not disgust, not the cold dismissal I had braced for my whole life, but a kind of stunned, careful stillness, as though I were a thing he had been told all his life did not exist, and had just found sleeping on his doorstep. "You are awake," he said. I scrambled up. Every instinct of 15 years said run, grovel, vanish. My king. I claimed sanctuary. I did not mean to. I will go. You will not go. He said it fast, and then looked faintly appalled at himself for the speed of it, and visibly tried again, slower, like a man retreating to a defensible position. You claimed sanctuary. The old law holds, whatever the great houses pretend to have forgotten. You are under the protection of this throne, and no one will touch you. That is all. That is the only reason. He stood, and he put the whole width of the top step between us, and I understood somehow that the distance was deliberate. It is mercy. Nothing more. Do not make it more than it is. I would learn, in time, that when Magnus of the Iron Reach told you firmly that a thing was nothing more than it was always, without exception, a great deal more than it was, and that the firmness was the size of what he was refusing to say. But I did not know him yet. I knew only that an Alpha King had called me mercy, and that his wolf was looking at me out of his eyes in a way that had nothing to do with mercy at all, and that by the time the sun was fully up, the candidates inside were already furious. They had a right to be furious, by their own reckoning, and I want to be fair to them, because being fair to the people who wanted me dead is the only revenge I have ever found worth taking. 40 highborn daughters had spent months and fortunes preparing to be chosen. They had brought tribute and trained their graces and arrived in the dyed silks of houses that had never once let an Omega through a front door. And they walked into the palace on the morning of the selection to find that the king had spent the dawn sitting on the ground beside a cast-out stray, had declared her under his personal protection, and would not have her removed. By noon it was the only thing anyone in that palace was talking about. And the talk had a shape, and the shape was, who does the Omega think she is? It is a better question than any of them knew. The Lady Ingrid did not join the furious chorus. That was the first thing I noticed, from my new and bewildering position as the king's protected embarrassment, and it was the thing that should have frightened me soonest. 40 women raged about the stray on the steps. The most beautiful and powerful of them, the front-runner, the daughter of Vanthold, said nothing at all. She only looked at me, once, across a crowded gallery, with a still and dawning recognition that turned my blood to water, because I knew that face. I had scrubbed the floors of the house that made it. And I saw the moment Lady Ingrid placed me, not as a random stray, but as the Omega from her own halls, the one her father had cast out the night before to die. Somehow here, somehow alive, somehow asleep on the king's own steps. I saw her understand that the loose thread her house had cut had walked 3 hours into the capital and tied itself directly to the throne. And I saw her decide, with the same still calm her whole house wore over its rot, to finish the cutting. The king, meanwhile, was losing a war with himself, and losing it in public, and I had a front-row view. He had said it was mercy. He kept saying it was mercy, with the dogged insistence of a man building a wall against a flood. But mercy does not sit on cold steps for an hour rather than wake someone. Mercy does not give a cast-out Omega a guarded room in the royal wing for her safety, while 40 highborn candidates are housed 3 corridors farther out. Mercy does not find reasons, 3 and 4 times a day, to pass through the gallery where the stray has been told she may sit, and then stand there at a careful distance with the look of a man who has marched himself somewhere on purpose, and cannot now remember a single reason he is allowed to be there. "You are doing it again," I told him, on the 3rd day, because someone had to, and I had stopped being able to afford the luxury of being afraid of him. Whatever this is, you stand there as though you have been sent, and then you say 3 words about the weather and leave looking furious with yourself. My king, I have been invisible my whole life. I am very good at reading people who do not want to be read, because no one ever bothered to hide from the furniture. You are not merciful. You are fighting something, and you are losing, and you keep coming back to the gallery to lose it again. He went very still. The wolf came up gold in his eyes, the way it did when his control slipped, and for a moment I thought I had finally pushed the Iron King too far. Then he said, low and rough, and as though the words were being pulled out of him against the full weight of his will, "Do you know what it is to be a king and find the one thing your blood has wanted your whole life asleep on your steps the morning you are required to choose a politically advantageous queen? Do you know what it would cost? The alliances, the houses, the stability of the entire reach, for me to want to cast out Omega, who is not even a candidate, who has no house, no rank, no name anyone will recognize?" His jaw worked. Every time I come to this gallery, I tell myself I am checking on a sanctuary guest. And every time, the moment I see you, my wolf settles in a way it has not settled in my entire life, and I have to leave before I do something my whole kingdom will make me pay for. So yes, I am fighting something, and I have called it mercy, because mercy is survivable, and the truth is not. That was the moment I stopped being afraid of the wrong thing. Because Lady Ingrid had been watching that gallery too. If you have ever been the lowest thing in a powerful place and felt the powerful suddenly, quietly, turn their full attention onto you. If you have ever realized that being noticed is far more dangerous than being invisible ever was, then you know the cold that settled into me those first days, and you know it does not lift. I am going to tell you what my mother's token truly was, and what the pack of Ashfell truly died of, and why the most beautiful woman at the selection needed me dead before the choosing. Stay with me to the great hall and the gloved hand. The thing I was never supposed to be, there, in that city, on those steps, turned out to be the only thing that could bring a great house down. Lady Ingrid moved on the fourth night, and she moved the way her house did everything, which was quietly and from behind a kind face. A maid I did not know brought me wine and warm bread, from one of the candidates, who feels the others have been unkind. I was hungry enough to nearly weep at it. I lifted the cup, and then a thing my buried memory did for me without asking. The old animal wariness of a child who survived a fire that was called a plague made me hesitate over the smell, and under the spiced wine I caught a green bitterness I did not have a name for, but that my body refused, and I set the cup down with hands that shook, and I poured it out the window, and in the morning a palace cat that had lapped at the spillage on the sill below was dead on the stones. She had tried to undo me the same way her house undid everything inconvenient. Quietly, deniably, a stray omega dead of bad wine, who would even ask? And it had nearly worked, and would have, but for a wariness I did not know I still carried from the last time the House of Vanthold decided someone needed to disappear. I understood then that I was not going to survive being a passive sanctuary guest, because the sanctuary protected me from the law, and not from a cup of wine in the dark. The only road where I lived ran straight through the thing I had spent 15 years training myself never to do, which was to take out my mother's token and show it to someone and say the name Ashfell out loud. So I went to the king, and I did the most dangerous thing of my life, which was to stop being nobody. I put the bone disc on the table between us. I told him what it was, the mark of Ashfell, the pack the realm believed died of plague 15 winters ago. I told him what I remembered under the story I had been given. Not sickness, but fire, and men who were not ill, and a mother folding my fingers over a token and telling me the mark was now a death sentence. And I told him the part I had only understood in the last 4 days, watching Lady Ingrid's still face place me across a gallery, that the house which rose to greatness in the years after Ashfell fell, the house now poised to set its daughter beside the king, was Vanthold. And that a pack does not die of plague in a single winter and leave its lands and its herds and its standing to fall so neatly into a neighbour's hands. Ashfell did not die of sickness. It died of Vanthold. And the last witness, the last living child of the slaughtered pack, had been buried under an Omega's rank in Vanthold's own halls for 15 years, until they cast her out the night before their daughter could become a queen. You are telling me, Magnus said slowly, turning the bone token in his fingers as though it might burn him, that the Lady Ingrid's house built its greatness on a slaughter dressed as a plague. That the front-runner to be my Luna is the daughter of the wolves who burned a pack and erased it from the realm's memory. And that the proof is a 6-year-old's memory and a token, and a witness everyone in my court has spent 4 days calling a stray. Yes, I said. I know exactly how little I weigh, my king. A cast-out Omega's word against the greatest house at your selection. That is precisely why they only bothered to bury me instead of killing me. Because who would ever believe the furniture remembers the fire? I made myself meet his eyes. But you can read a token. You can ask why a plague left a pack's lands in one neighbour's hands. You can pull the thread now that someone has finally handed it to you. I am not asking you to believe a stray. I am asking you to be the first powerful person in 15 years to bother looking. And I watched the reluctant king stop being reluctant. It is a thing to see. Everything he had been fighting, the wanting, the wolf, the truth of what I was to him, fell away in front of a larger fury. Because Magnus of the Iron Reach was many guarded things, but he was not a man who could hold a slaughtered pack's token in his hand and choose the comfortable story. He had been resisting me to protect his kingdom. He stopped, all at once, because protecting his kingdom and protecting me had just turned out to be the same act. That is the great hall the cold open promised you. Now you know what was in my fist. Magnus did not move against Vantold in secret, because Vantold's whole power was secrecy, and he meant to take that from them first. He called the selection to its formal assembly, 40 candidates, every great house, the full court, and before the choosing could begin, he did the thing no one expected, which was to summon the stray Omega from the steps into the centre of the hall and ask her, in front of all of them, to show the realm what she carried. I have never been so frightened. 40 silks, and a hall of lords, and the Lady Ingrid in white at the front, and me in the middle of all of it with my mother's token in a fist that would not open. And Ingrid, who understood the instant she saw the king's face exactly what was about to happen, did not wait to be exposed. She crossed the floor to me, fast and graceful, and she closed her gloved hand over my fist and the token inside it, and she put her mouth close to my ear and said the words the cold open gave you. No one will believe a stray. Give it to me and disappear. I will let you keep your life. Because even now, even cornered, the House of Vantold believed the low could always be made to choose silence and survival, the way the low always had. She was wrong, and she was wrong about me specifically, and I am going to tell you the exact shape of how she was wrong, because it is the only thing I have ever been proud of. I did not give her the token. I opened my fist instead, in her grip, so that the bone disc and its mark caught the light of the great hall for the first time in 15 years, and I said, not to her, but past her, to the whole assembled court, in the carrying voice of a woman who has nothing left to lose and has finally remembered she once had everything. This is the mark of Ashfell. I am the last daughter of the pack your house burned and called a plague, Lady Ingrid. You cast me out to die so no one would remember the fire. You should have killed me properly. Your house never could be bothered to finish what it started, and that is the whole reason you are about to lose everything. She went for me then. The grace fell off her like a dropped cloak, and there was a thin blade in her gloved hand, the same quiet, deniable death her house had always preferred, and she drove it at me to silence the witness even now, in front of everyone, because a cornered killer stops calculating. But I had grown up surviving the House of Vanthold, and the King's Wolf had spent 4 days fighting the urge to protect me, and was not going to lose me in the hall where it finally could, and between Ingrid's strike and Magnus's fury, the blade caught my side instead of my heart. A hot, bright shock, and a wash of heat. My own blood coming down over my mother's token, where it had fallen open on the marble. Then Halvard, the king's second, had Ingrid's arm, and then Ingrid, and then the floor. And the hall was chaos, and Magnus had me, down on the cold marble of the great hall, his hands pressed to my side. The iron control of the Iron King shattered into something raw and enormous as he understood how close the thing he had spent 4 days refusing to want had come to dying in front of him. I called it mercy, he said, his voice in ruins. For 4 days I stood in that gallery and called it mercy, because the truth terrified me. If you had died proving what you are, with me still pretending it was mercy, it is a side, not a heart. I have survived a fire that took a whole pack. I am not going to be undone by a Vanthold knife on the one day it finally matters that I lived. I got the words out through my teeth, and I closed my bloody hand over my mother's token on the marble, and I held it up between us, so the whole reeling hall could see the mark of a pack the realm had been told was dead. Stop pretending, Magnus. The wolf knew on the steps. You knew on the steps. You called me Mercy, because the truth was not survivable. And you were wrong. The truth is the only thing either of us is going to survive on. Say it. They will believe you now. They will believe all of it now. And the reluctant king stopped being reluctant in front of his entire kingdom. With a slaughtered pack's heir bleeding in his arms, and the mark of Ashfell catching the light of the great hall, the Alpha King of the Iron Reach said the thing his whole guarded reign had been built to never say, that he had found his fated mate asleep on his own steps the morning he was meant to choose a politic queen, that he had hidden behind the word mercy, because a king is not supposed to want to cast out Omega with no house and no name, and that he had been a coward for 4 days, and would not be one for a single hour more. The realm shook, and Ashfell was the reason. A murdered pack is one thing. A murdered pack dressed as a plague for 15 years, its lands and standing built into the greatness of a house, now reaching for the throne itself, exposed in open court by its last surviving child. That rearranged the whole map of who in the Iron Reach was clean, and who only looked it. Magnus pulled the thread I had handed him, and it unravelled everything. The House of Vanthold's rise, traced back through 15 years, to a single burned winter. The witnesses who had been paid or silenced, the neighbours who had looked away. Vanthold fell as it had risen, only faster and in daylight. Lady Ingrid, who had nearly been a queen, was given to the law for the burning of Ashfell and the attempted murders of its heir, and the great houses who had spent 15 years untroubled by the convenient death of an inconvenient pack discovered, all at once, that there was a king who would reopen a 15-year-old grave on the word of a stray, and that no tidy story was safe from him any more. It made the powerful afraid. It should have. The lands of Ashfell were restored, in time, to its last daughter, though I have given most of them to the scattered survivors who began, once the truth was loud, to come quietly out of the low ranks of a dozen packs where they too had been buried. Omegas and servants and forgotten strays who turned out, every one, to remember a fire that was called a plague. There were more of us than anyone knew. There always are. The realm is full of people who were told the furniture remembers nothing. My side healed slow, and left a long pale scar, and on cold mornings it pulls. I find I do not mind it. It is the second proof I carry that I was once loved by people the world tried to erase, the first being a small bone token with the mark of Ashfell, which I no longer hide against my skin, because my mother told me to keep it secret to keep me alive, and the secret has done its work, and now the keeping can be a different kind. It is a year now, as I set this down, and I am Luna of the Iron Reach, which is a sentence I still cannot quite write without expecting someone to come correct it. The cast-out Omega who slept on the steps sits beside the throne now, and the great houses have had to learn to bow to a daughter of a pack they helped the realm forget, and they manage it, mostly because Magnus watches them. And because I have discovered I am very good at remembering exactly who said what in the days when I was furniture. Magnus is still a guarded man. You do not unlearn a reign of iron in a year. But he no longer calls the things he feels by smaller, safer names. And that, from him, is the loudest love I will ever be given. On the steps where he found me, he has had a thing done that scandalized the Masons, the old sanctuary law, which the great houses had let everyone forget, carved into the stone at the top of the stair in letters tall enough to read from the street, so that any wolf of any rank or none who reaches those steps knows that the throne will protect her, and so that no powerful house can ever again pretend the law was lost. He says it is so the next cast-out stray, who has nowhere to go, knows the steps are hers. I think it is so he never forgets that the best thing that ever happened to him arrived with nothing and asleep. We do not argue about which. He came to find me just now, where I was writing this by the fire, and read over my shoulder the way he is not supposed to and always does, and asked what I was setting down. I told him I was writing the story of the morning he found a stray asleep on his steps and called it Mercy. He was quiet a moment, in the way that used to read as cold, and that I now know is a guarded man choosing a true word over an easy one. You should change one line, he said. You keep writing that I let you sleep out of mercy, and I let it stand for a year, because the truth made me sound like a man undone by a stranger on a doorstep, which I was. He set his hand over the token, where it lies now on the table, openly, in the light. But I have thought about it for a year, and I will say it where you cannot unwrite it. I did not sit on those steps, because I pitied you. I sat down, because the moment I saw you, my wolf went so quiet and so certain that I was afraid to make a single sound that might wake you and end it, afraid that if you opened your eyes, the thing I had wanted my whole life would turn out to be a dream on my doorstep. I called it mercy to the steward, because mercy was a thing a king is allowed to feel. The truth is, I sat down beside a sleeping stranger because some part of me had been waiting for her since before I knew her face, and could not bear to wake her in case she was not real. He almost smiled. So do not write that I let the stray sleep out of mercy. Write that the king could not bring himself to wake her because he already knew, the way the wolf always knows first, that she was the one thing in the realm he was not supposed to find, and had found anyway, with nothing, on his own cold steps. So I will leave you with the question I still turn over, and I would truly love to know what you think. He swears his wolf knew me the instant he saw me on the steps. That the stillness was certainty, not pity. But I only came to those steps because I had nowhere else on earth to go, and only remembered the sanctuary law, because my dying mother folded it into my hand 15 years before. So who truly brought me to the Iron Throne, the king's wolf, waiting on the steps for a woman it had never met? Or my mother, in the last moment of a burning pack, telling a child where the lawless could be safe? Did Magnus find me, or did she send me? 15 years too late, and exactly in time. Tell me your verdict below, I read every one. And so, he has confessed, does the king. And if you want to stay on the steps of the Iron Reach with us a while longer, comment the token, and I will tell you next what happened when the buried survivors of Ashfell began arriving at our gates, one by one, out of the low ranks of a dozen packs, to be called at last by the name they were made to forget. So if you are ever turned out with nothing, wherever you are listening from tonight, walk toward the place that still owes you protection, and lie down and sleep. You never know who has been waiting on the steps for someone exactly as unwanted as you. I was not supposed to be there. It was the only place I was ever truly meant to be. There is a cold that lives in the body of a wolf, whose mate has cast her off, and it is not like any other cold. Because it comes from the inside, from the place where another soul used to be tethered, and now is not. I had been dying of that cold for 11 days when I finally understood that the only way to stop it was to risk the one thing that had caused it. He stood over me with his hand held out. The offer, the bond, the thing my whole kind is taught to reach for. And I lay on the stone too weak to lift my head. And I understood with perfect clarity that if I took his hand and he changed his mind, if I let myself be tethered again, and was cut loose a second time, the severing would finish what the first one started, and I would simply stop. One rejection had brought me to his gates with nothing. A second would put me in the ground. And he was asking me to risk exactly that, on the word of a proud cold king I had no reason on earth to trust, because the alternative was to lie on his floor and let the cold take me. I had to choose. And I want you to understand, before I tell you any of it, that I had every reason to say no. I did not go to him on purpose. I went because my legs gave out, and his gates were right there. He opened them. My name was Fenna, and 11 days before I lay dying on an Alpha King's floor, I had been a mated Omega with a small good life, which only goes to show how fast the floor of a life can drop. I was an Omega, the lowest rank the packs keep, the rank you are born into when your blood carries nothing the pack can use. But I had been mated, which is more than most Omegas get, to a rising young lord of the Stoneholt pack named Caster, who had chosen me when I was 19, and he was not yet important. It was not a fated bond. Most matings are not. The fated kind is rare, a thing the old wolves speak of in hushed voices, and what Caster and I had was the ordinary kind, a chosen mating, a bond made by will rather than by fate. But it was real, and it was warm enough, and for 4 years I let myself believe that a low woman could keep a rising man, that being useful and quiet and devoted would be enough. It was not enough. Rising men rise past the things that were enough. When Castor's ambition outgrew me, when a marriage to the Lady Ravna, high-born and connected and exactly the rung he needed, came within his reach, he did the thing the law allows a wolf to do to a chosen mate. The thing that is permitted and rare because of what it costs the one it is done to. He rejected the bond. He stood in the hall of Stoneholt and spoke the words of rejection over me. Formally, before witnesses, severing 4 years with 3 sentences, and then he had me put out the gate. Because a rejected mate is an embarrassment, and an embarrassment is best kept far away. I will not pretend the words were the worst of it. The worst of it was the cold that came after, the severing, the way the rejection of a mate bond does not simply end a marriage, but tears something out of the body that the body does not know how to live without. For a strong wolf, it is agony. For an Omega, low, weak, with no reserves of strength to draw on, it is often death. I walked away from Stoneholt with nothing, no pack, no rank, no mate, and a cold spreading through me that I understood, with a strange flat calm, was going to kill me. Because that is what rejection does to a wolf like me, and everyone knows it, and that is rather the point of being allowed to do it. I walked because lying down meant dying faster. I had no destination. I want that understood, because the whole realm later told this story as though I had set out to throw myself on the mercy of a king, as though it were a plan. It was not a plan. It was a dying animal walking in the only direction the road went, and the road went toward the capital, and the capital had the king's fortress at its heart, and the king's fortress had gates, high, iron, famously shut, the gates of a cold king who turned away petitioners and refused all comers, and on the 11th day my legs gave out exactly there, at the foot of those shut gates, because that was simply as far as my body could carry me before it quit. I did not knock. I did not beg. I had no strength left for either. I folded down onto the cold stone at the foot of the most powerful wolf's locked gates, and I closed my eyes, and I prepared to die there, which seemed as good a place as any, and better than most. And somewhere far above me, a window opened. I did not see him at the window. I was past seeing anything. But I have heard the story since, from a dozen horrified advisors, and it goes like this. The Alpha King was at the high window of his solar, where he stood most mornings looking out over a realm he ruled and did not seem to enjoy. And he looked down and saw, at the foot of his shut gates, a rejected Omega folding down onto the stone to die. He could not have known the particulars from that height, could not have known my name, my pack, my story. But he could see what I was. A rejected wolf has a way of carrying the cold that another wolf can read from a distance, a wrongness in how the body holds itself, the unmistakable mark of a bond torn out by force. The king saw it, and the king, who turned away lords and envoys and petitioners with letters of introduction, who kept those gates shut against the whole pleading world, said one word to the guard at his door: "Open them." His advisors did not understand it. They have spent, by their own account, months failing to understand it. The king of the cold fortress, who let no one in, who had refused every match and every supplicant for years, came down himself. Himself, the advisors keep saying, as though that were the strangest part, and perhaps it was, and crossed his own courtyard, and knelt on the stone outside his open gates, beside a dying rejected Omega he had never met, and gathered her up out of the cold, and carried her inside, and would not let anyone take her from him. I woke 3 days later in a warm room in the fortress of a king I had never spoken to, still cold to the bone, but no longer dying, with no idea why I was alive, or why the most powerful wolf in the realm had opened his shut gates for a thing the whole world had agreed was worthless. It took me a long time to understand the answer, and when I did, it broke my heart, because the answer was not pity. The king's name was Ragnar, and he was exactly as cold as the song said, which I had cause to study closely, because for the first weeks of my strange new life he watched me with a guarded, unreadable attention that I could not place. He was a proud man, proud in the particular way of a wolf who has built his whole self into armor. Every word measured, every feeling buried so deep the court had decided there were none. He ruled well and warmly toward no one. His advisors feared him, and he had never taken a Luna, never courted, never shown the slightest interest in the matches his council had been pressing on him for years, which the realm had decided meant the Iron King was simply too cold for love, married to his crown. He came to see me as I recovered, which scandalized the household, and he did not say much, and what he said was clipped and careful and gave nothing away. But I was an Omega, and an Omega learns to read the powerful the way a sailor reads weather, because our survival depends on knowing the mood of people who do not think we are worth a mood. And the more I watched the cold king who had inexplicably saved me, the more I saw a thing that made no sense and would not stop making no sense, until finally it made the only sense there was. He carried the cold too, not the fresh, killing cold I carried. Mine was 11 days old, and his was years deep, but the same cold, the same wrongness in how a body holds itself, the same mark of a bond torn out. I knew it because I was living inside it, and you cannot hide that particular wound from someone who has it, however deep you bury everything else. The proud, cold, mateless Alpha King who had opened his shut gates for a dying, rejected Omega was, himself, a rejected wolf. He had not saved me out of pity. He had looked down from his window and seen, at his gates, the one thing in the world he had never been able to speak of: his own wound, walking, on someone else's body, and he had not been able to turn it away. If you have ever been recognized, truly recognized, not pitied, by the one person who carries the exact wound you carry, and so does not flinch from it, then you know the strange, frightening warmth that began to thaw the cold in me those first weeks, and you know it is not a thing you can refuse once you have felt it. I am going to tell you who had rejected the king, and how the people who threw us both away had built a kingdom's worth of power on the throwing, and what it costs a dying wolf to risk the bond a second time. Stay with me to the open gate and the offered hand. I came to him with nothing, and meaning nothing by it, and it turned out to be the truest thing I ever did. I learnt the king's secret slowly, in pieces, because a proud man does not hand you his deepest shame, you have to earn the edges of it. But I had time, and I had the particular permission of a fellow casualty. And eventually, by a fire, looking at the flames and not at me the way he said all the hardest things, Ragnar told me. Years before, when he was newly crowned, and not yet armoured, the Alpha King had loved a high-born woman named Ravna. More than loved, he had believed, with the certainty of a young wolf, that she was meant for him, and he had offered her everything, the bond and the crown and his whole unguarded self. And Ravna had weighed it, and weighed what else was on offer in the realm, and rejected him. Not cruelly, even, practically, she had decided that a cold young king with a hard reign ahead of him was a poorer bet than a rising, charming, ambitious lord with a softer path, and she had refused the alpha king of the Iron Reach to his face and chosen the other man, and the king had survived it the way strong wolves survive rejection. He had not died of the cold. He was too powerful for that. But he had never been warm again. He had buried the whole thing so deep that the realm believed he had simply never loved, and he had ruled from inside his armor for years, the most powerful wolf alive and the most certain, in the one secret room of himself, that he was a thing that could be weighed and found wanting and set aside. "I let them think me too cold for a Luna," he said, to the fire. It was easier than letting them know I had offered everything I had to one woman and been told it was not enough. A king may be cold. He may not be rejected. So I became cold, on purpose, where the whole realm could see, to bury the truth that I had been refused. He finally looked at me, and then I stood at my window and saw a wolf dying of the exact thing I have spent years pretending never happened to me, and I could not stand at a window and watch the realm do to someone else what it had done to me, and call it mercy that I looked away. So I opened the gates. I did not know how to explain it to my council. I still do not. The truth is the one thing I cannot say to them, that I let you in because you were the only person I had ever seen who knew. And then he told me the rest, the part that turned my slow private grief into something with a target. The lord who had rejected me to rise, my caster, had risen by mating the highborn Lady Ravna. The very woman who had rejected the king. The two people who had thrown us away for each other. They had built their whole ascent, their power block, at the heart of the court, on two rejections, his and mine, a man who cast off a useful Omega, and a woman who cast off an inconvenient king. And they had risen and risen on it. And they were, even now, among the most powerful figures in the realm. I had not been rejected by a random cruel man. I had been rejected by half of the couple that had also broken the king, and the two of us, the discarded Omega and the discarded king, were sitting by a fire in a fortress, while the people who discarded us ruled. You can imagine that Lord Caster and the Lady Ravna did not love the news that the two people they had thrown away had found each other. They learnt it the way the court learned everything. Slowly, then all at once. The rejected Omega the king had inexplicably taken in did not die as expected, did not fade quietly, did not get sent away. She recovered. She was seen with the king. And worse, far worse, the king, the cold, mateless, armoured king, whose refusal to marry had made him safely predictable for years, began, around her, to thaw, in ways the whole court could see and none could explain. And Lord Caster and Lady Ravna understood, faster than anyone, exactly what it meant, because they were the two people in the realm who knew what the king's coldness had been hiding. If the rejected Omega became the king's Luna, two things happened that they could not survive. The first was that the truth would come out, that the Iron King had been rejected, by Ravna, years ago, and that her whole power rested on the king's secret shame staying secret. The second was simpler and older. A man who has thrown a woman in the gutter cannot bear to watch her crowned. And Caster was a small enough man that the watching alone would have moved him to murder. So they moved against me, the way the powerful move against the low, first with the law, and then with a knife. The law came first. Caster stood up in council and made the case that a rejected Omega had no standing to be near the king, that I was a fortune hunter preying on His Majesty's well-known solitude, that a wolf cast off by her own mate for cause was self-evidently a creature of bad character. and that for the good of the realm I should be removed from the court and the king protected from my manipulations. It was clever, because it used my own wound against me. Who would believe a rejected Omega was anything but worthless? Her own mate had judged her so. The council, who already did not understand why the king had taken me in, leaned toward Castor, and for a stretch of days it looked as though the law itself would put me back outside the gates. It failed for one reason, and the reason was Ragnar, who did the first warm public thing of his reign and simply refused, would not release me, would not explain, planted his cold royal will against his whole council and held. But a king who refuses to explain himself only buys time, not safety. And Castor, seeing the legal road close, took the other one. This is the part where the dying woman who had lain down at the gates with nothing had to decide whether she had anything left to fight with. And I will tell you honestly that for a while I did not think I did. Because the severing was not done with me. A rejected bond does not heal in 3 days or 3 weeks. The cold had retreated when the king took me in, but it had not left, and it would not leave. Because the thing that truly heals a rejected wolf is not warmth or time, but a new tether, a new bond to replace the one that was torn out, and I would have died before I reached for another bond. Because the last one had nearly killed me when it broke, and to risk a second breaking was to risk a death I would not survive. I was healing slowly only because Ragnar's strange, fierce care was a kind of anchor, an almost bond, enough to keep the cold at bay, but not enough to drive it out. We were 2 rejected wolves keeping each other from freezing, neither of us willing to risk the one thing that would actually thaw us, because we had each offered that exact thing once and been told it was not enough. And then Castor took the choice out of my hands, because cornered cruel men always do. He could not kill the king. The king was surrounded and strong. But a rejected Omega, half-healed, still cold, still fragile from a severing everyone knew could kill her at any time. A rejected Omega could simply die of her wound, sadly, naturally, no hand visible, and who would question it? Everyone knew the severing took them in the end. So Castor arranged for the small thing that would tip a half-healed rejected wolf back over the edge. He got to the source of the fragile anchor that was keeping me alive. He could not break the king's bond to me, because there was no formal bond yet. But he could break the king. I do not have all of how he did it. The king's man Brand pieced the rest together. But the shape of it was this. Castor and Ravna, between them, set out to make Ragnar believe that I had played him, that the rejected Omega had learned the king's secret wound and was using it, working his sympathy. A manipulator, exactly as Castor had told the council. They were good at it. They had Ravna, who knew precisely which words would land on the king's oldest fear, the fear that he was a thing that could be weighed and found to be a poor bet. And for a few terrible days it worked. I felt the anchor weaken. I felt Ragnar pull back into his armor, watching me again with the cold, guarded eyes of the first weeks. Wondering. I could see him wondering whether the one person who had known his wound had only been using it. And as he pulled back, the cold came forward, and the severing I had been half surviving began, quietly, to finish. That is the dying I promised you at the start. Not a knife. A withdrawal. Castor did not have to murder me. He only had to convince a man who had been rejected once that he was being played, and let the man's own armor do the killing, and let the cold take the rejected Omega the way everyone always expected it to. I lay on the floor of that fortress with the cold closing over me, and I understood that I was about to die of the same thing twice, of a man deciding I was not worth the risk, and I found, at the very bottom of it, that I was angry, and that anger was the first warm thing I had felt in days. So I did not die quietly. I dragged myself up, and I went to find the king, and I said the thing that a rejected Omega is never supposed to say to an Alpha King, which was the truth, all of it, with no softening for his rank. "They are doing it to you again," I said. My voice came out cold and clear, from the same place the anger lived. "Ravna rejected you once by convincing you that you were not worth the bet, and now she has convinced you of it a second time, and you have let her, because it is the story you already believe about yourself. You think I was using your wound. I was not. But I see why it was so easy to make you believe it, because the one thing a rejected wolf cannot imagine is that someone might actually choose him, and so the moment Ravna whispered that I was only pretending, you believed it. Because being used is at least a story where you were never really wanted in the first place, and that hurts less than risking being wanted and refused again." I was shaking, and not from the cold now. "I am dying, Ragnar. The severing is taking me, because you pulled back, and you are the only anchor I have. And I could let it. It would be easier than this. But I am not going to die letting the same two people win twice. So I am going to tell you the truth, and let you do what you will with it. You did not save a manipulator at your gates. You saved the only other person in the realm who knows your exact wound, and somewhere in these weeks I stopped being grateful to you and started being yours, fated. The real kind. The rare kind neither of us has ever felt, because we only ever knew the chosen kind that breaks, and I have been as afraid to say it as you have been to hear it. Because we have both offered everything once, and been told it was not enough. I held out my hand, the way he had once held out his. I am offering anyway. Take it or do not. But do not let them tell you one more time that you are not worth the risk. I came to your gates with nothing, and I never wanted a single thing from you but the one thing you are most afraid to believe anyone could want, which is you. That is the offered hand the cold open promised you, except it was mine offered to him, and his to me, both at once, two rejected wolves, each holding out the exact thing that had nearly destroyed them, asking the other to risk it. He took my hand, and the bond that formed was not the chosen kind, the made-by-will kind that Caster had spoken over me and broken in 3 sentences. It was the other kind, the rare, true kind, the fated bond that the old wolves speak of in hushed voices, and it slammed into both of us with a force that drove us to our knees on the fortress floor. Because a true bond forming over the wreckage of 2 rejections is not gentle, it is a thing tearing through years of armour and 11 days of killing cold, all at once, and we knelt there gripping each other's hands, while it burned the old severing out of me, and the old shame out of him. It hurt more than the rejection had. I have never been so glad to hurt. The cold went out of me for the first time in 11 days, driven out at last by the only thing that could drive it out, which was a tether that would not break, offered by the one person who had as much reason as I did to never offer it again. When I could breathe, I was warm. For the first time since Stoneholt, I was warm. And the Iron King, kneeling on his own floor with his rejected Omega's hand fused to his, looked at me with the armour finally, fully gone, and said, "They told me for years I was too cold to love. I let them, because it was easier than the truth. I am done letting them." He rose, and he drew me up with him, and the cold, proud king, who had buried his rejection for years, turned to face the court that had never known it. It shook the realm, and the shaking was the point. Ragnar did the thing no Alpha King in the history of the territories had ever done, the thing that cost him more than any war could have. He stood before his assembled court and told them he had been rejected. He named Ravna. He laid his oldest, most carefully buried shame open in front of every house in the realm. That years ago the Lady Ravna had weighed the Iron King and found him a poor bet, and that she and the lord she chose had built their whole power on the secret of it, and on the matching cruelty of Castor casting off an omega to climb. He told them that he had spent years letting the realm believe him too cold for love, rather than admit he had been refused, and that he was finished protecting the people who had refused him at the cost of the people they had thrown away. You cannot imagine what it did. A king admitting he was rejected should have been the end of him. Pride is an alpha's whole standing. Instead, it was the end of Castor and Ravna, because their entire power had rested on the king's shame staying buried, and the moment he spoke it himself, in his own voice, by his own choice, it was no longer a weapon anyone could hold over him. Their block collapsed. Castor's cruelties, once the king's men went looking, were many and provable. They were stripped and cast out, Castor put outside the gates with nothing, which I will admit I did not weep over. And the realm learned a lesson it had badly needed, which is that the rejected are not the worthless, that the cast-off thing at your gate may be the truest wolf in your kingdom, and that even a king is allowed to have been wounded and survive it without being less. The advisors finally understood why he had opened the gates. It only took them admitting that their cold king had a wound, which took them rather longer than it should have, because the powerful are always the last to imagine that the powerful can hurt. It is a year now, as I set this down, and I am Luna of the Iron Reach, which the older courtiers have decided to find dignified rather than admit they cannot explain it. The iron mating band I wore to his gates, Castor's band, the one I could not take off for 11 days because the severing would not let go even after the man did, is gone. I took it off the night the true bond formed, finally able to. The cold that had welded it to me at last melted out, and Ragnar had it thrown not into the river, but into the forge, and from the iron of it he had made a single nail, which he drove into the great gate of the fortress himself, low, where you would have to kneel to see it, in the spot where I lay down to die. He says it is so he never forgets what he nearly left outside. I think it is so the gate remembers it was opened. We do not argue about which, for the gates of the Iron Reach do not shut any more. That is the thing the realm marvels at now, that the Cold King's famous locked gates stand open, that any wolf cast off with nothing may reach them and be let in, because the king who once looked down from a window and could not bear to turn away his own wound-walking has decided that no rejected wolf will ever again die at his foot for the crime of having been found wanting by someone unworthy of the finding. They come now. The rejected, the cast off, the severed, and the low. The gate stays open. I see to it personally, because I know exactly how far a dying wolf can walk, and exactly how it feels to fold down at a locked door, and exactly what it is worth to have it open instead. He came to find me just now, where I was writing this by the fire, and read over my shoulder the way he is not supposed to, and always does, and asked what I was setting down. I told him I was writing the story of the morning he opened his shut gates for a dying Omega he had never met. He was quiet a moment, in the way that used to read as cold, and that I now know is a once-rejected man, choosing a true word over an easy one. "You write it as though I rescued you," he said. "As though I looked down from a window and chose, out of some greatness, to save a stranger. I have let it stand, because it is the kinder story, and you are kind to a fault, but I will say it where you cannot unwrite it." He set his hand over mine, where the iron band used to be. "I did not open the gates to save you, Fenna. I opened them because I had spent years standing at that window, looking out at a realm that had refused me, frozen behind glass. And then one morning I looked down and saw my own wound lying in the road, dying. And I understood in a single breath that if I left you out there, I was leaving myself out there. That the cold I had been ruling from inside of for years was about to take someone else. And that I could not survive watching it. I did not save a stranger. I went down to that gate to save the only person who could prove to me that being rejected did not have to be the end of a wolf, and you were, and you did, and you saved me the same hour I saved you, which is the only kind of saving I have ever trusted since." He almost smiled. "So do not write that I rescued a dying Omega. Write that 2 rejected wolves lay down at the same gate, years apart, and that the second one was the first thing that ever made the first one get up. So I will leave you with the question I still turn over, and I would truly love to know what you think." He swears he opened the gates because he recognized his own wound in me, that it was not mercy, but recognition. One rejected wolf, unable to abandon another. But I only reached those gates at all because they were the closest shelter my dying legs could carry me to. I did not choose him. I chose the nearest wall. So, who truly brought us together? The king, who saw his own grief in the road and could not look away. Or nothing grander than exhaustion and a road that happened to end at his door? Did fate send me to the one wolf who would understand? Or did I simply fall down in the right place, and we made the rest into love because we were both so tired of the cold? Tell me your verdict below. I read every one. And so, he has confessed, does the king. And if you want to stay inside the open gates with us a while longer, comment the open gate, and I will tell you next what happened when the realm's other rejected and cast off wolves, having heard there was finally a king who would not turn them away, began arriving at our door, and what we built for them, who knew better than anyone what it is to be found wanting. So if you are ever cast out with nothing, wherever you are listening from tonight, and your legs give out at the nearest wall, pray it is a wall with someone behind it who knows your particular cold. I lay down to die at a stranger's gate. He opened it because he had been lying at a gate his whole life too. Sometimes the only one who will let you in is the one who was never let in either.